So friends, in the first part of the discussion, the kind of general idea of about Hazlitt as an essayist has been explained, and that idea will now take us to the actual writing of Hazlitt, his essays, and the kind of expression, the kind of mode, the kind of form that the essay takes in his hands, that will be discussed in a way first hand. So I request Dr. Bajaj to start talking about specifically the essay that he wrote and the kind of temper that he showed there. So
Right.
over to you.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So, taking you to the introduction to the round table itself, the round table is the book of essays that we call the English essays, that is the periodical essay, the essays which are short and not very, it's more like freewheeling, where the writer is giving one's viewpoint and making general statements about life, culture, people, whatever is popular at the time and whatever has swayed the popular imagination of the time. So the roundtable essays then constitute a very important sort of part of Hazlitt's literary oeuvre and his writing career, because they project a different side of Hazlitt. And this collection, the Round Table, actually consisted of these 52 essays, out of which 40 essays were written by Hazlitt and the remaining 12 were written by his friend Leigh Hunt. Now, Leigh Hunt actually wrote the introduction to the Round Table, and I would like to quote from Leigh Hunt's idea regarding how this book came about. And once we do that, then we'll discuss some of the essays, at least 2 essays from the Round Table, right? So I'd like you to look at your screens here so you can make sense of the text itself. Now, this is an excerpt from the introduction to the book, The Round Table. Let me quote. We wish to avoid the solitary and dictatorial manner of the latter essays, and at the same time are bound to show our readers that we have something to make up for the want of flapped waistcoats and an instructive decay of the faculties. We hereby inform them that we are, literally speaking, a small party of friends who meet once a week at the Round Table to discuss the merits of a leg of mutton and of the subjects upon which we are to write. This we do without any sort of formality, letting the stream of conversation wander through any ground it pleases. Unquote. Now, this is how Leigh Hunt actually projected the idea behind this book, The Round Table. Now, you can see humor when Leigh Hunt says, well, we discuss the merits of the leg of a mutton, because they're all sitting together and enjoying food also, and the subjects that we plan to write on. Right now, you can see the kind of this kind of poking at the earlier essays when they say that we want to avoid the dictatorial manner of the essays who came before us, and that's kind of solitary manner, and we want to show the readers and we want to make up for the want of flapped waistcoats. Now, flapped waistcoats of course refers to all these gentlemen, elite group of critics and writers, and accompanied with an instructive decay of the faculties, right? So you can see how humor and this kind of digging is going on constantly, right? But I just wanted you to understand how the English essay has really come about. It was a product of people sitting together, conversing about events, and then deciding to put it together and put it down in the form of an essay that could talk about life as it was lived at the time, right? It was basically the culture of the time that these people discussed. Now, remember, this was Leigh Hunt and not Hazlitt. Hazlitt is more, in that sense, very proper, earnest, and committed, and writes stuff that really hits him hard, or he's really passionate about. Now, let me take you to one of the essays from the book itself, this which is number 4 essay from the book, The Round Table. It is titled On Classical Education. Okay, now he's discussing the value of classical education in present times. Now, obviously, when you are discussing the ancient literature and he's discussing language, literature, etc., then one is looking at one's past, one is looking at one's history and trying to understand what sense to make of the past and this history. What is the meaning of history in life as such? Now, he brings into discussion then in this essay on classical education, he brings into discussion the study of the ancient and modern languages. And he is discussing how ancient and modern languages, ancient language has moved and has helped modern language and all of that. This takes him to the discussion on history, and the meaning of history for the present generation. And I'd like to quote, from on this particular point, his idea about history. He says, by reading these ancient texts, that is these classical works of literature, he says, I quote, by conversing with the mighty dead, we imbibe sentiment with knowledge. We become strongly attached to those who can no longer either hurt or serve us, except through the influence which they exert over the mind. We feel the presence of that power which gives immortality to human thoughts and actions, and catch the flame of enthusiasm from all nations and ages. Unquote.
A kind of internationalism.
Yes.
He's talking about humanity. He's
Right.
talking about classes all over the world.
Right. He's not looking at just England or
Yes.
just the country. He's saying that what it does, and the range and the sweep, of is phenomenal. And just in a couple of pages, he's able to do that because these are short essays. But what I found was that it was very insightful also, that you see, you are me by conversing with the mighty dead, that is these great literatures and the Roman,
Greeks and Romans.
Greeks and
yes.
So he talks about them. He says, these literatures that are available to us of these mighty people, or not just literature, but whatever matter, the written matter that is available to us about these ages that no more exist today, but they speak to us. He says that we imbibe not just knowledge, but we also imbibe sentiment, the feeling. So again, you can see that being a romantic, now this is the point, as a romantic essayist, you will make sure that you are pointing out sentiment with knowledge. The first line itself, we imbibe, he doesn't say we imbibe knowledge.
It's not dry knowledge.
He doesn't say we imbibe knowledge. He says we imbibe sentiment with knowledge.
Yes.
So sentiment is very important, and he says that this is something, and attachment. We become strongly attached to those who can no longer, and I found this very insightful. The fact that we go to our past literatures and our history with a sense of openness, because there is no imposition. This person can't come to you and say, come to your gate and say, read my book, right? This person has no control over you, in the sense this person can't hurt you, and this person cannot serve you. So any kind of selfish attachment or any kind of present fear, that you probably would do something for someone because you feel that they might hurt you, or someone serving you, so you feel beholden and you might want to give them some reward. But the mighty dead writers have no ability to hurt or serve us. And so when we approach them, we are building a different kind of attachment, which is not immediate, which is not related to, oh, they serve me and therefore I need to do this, oh, they might hurt me and therefore I need to read them. But there is a sense of complete objectivity with which you go, because this person has no influence over you, except that they can have an influence, they can influence your mind, and the only way they can sway you is through their ability or their intellectual capacity. I don't know if I'm clear here.
This is about the ancient writers.
Yeah.
The mighty, the great mighty
the
people.
dead.
I think it's quite correct.
Yeah.
Very,
so
very
he says
good
that the dead can no longer hurt or serve us, right? And except through the influence that they might have on us, on our minds.
Which is a humanist thought.
Yes.
The other thing has been taken away.
There is nothing, no selfish point, there is no immediate problem, there is no present that is coming in the way of it. And he says we feel the presence of the power which gives immortality to human thought. We also understand that human thought becomes immortal through them. So immortality to human thoughts and actions, and therefore we catch the flame of enthusiasm from all nations and ages.
You see, there are two words, and of course you are using them interchangeably, but I say that anyway you are talking not about objectivity but about involvement. You enter life's processes and from there you talk, and that makes you earnest. So objectivity of the scientific kind is not there, and that is not required for Hazlitt. So that makes him a romantic. Would you agree?
Yeah, also because for him the flame of enthusiasm and sentiment is equally important as knowledge. I mean, they go hand in hand. In his other essay, which is titled on gusto, for instance, he talks about what gusto is, and he goes on to say that gusto is power and passion. And again, he says it is the enthusiasm which is not just in the mind but felt in the body. So he says, he talks about an artwork, and he says the painting becomes alive because the painter puts softness in, say, a woman's frame. So he says that softness is feeling and sentiment and emotion that needs to be conveyed throughout art.
That is typical 19th century thought.
Right.
It's not there in the 18th
century, which is why I said that there is sentiment and knowledge together that come together. And in fact, he says that there is both an awareness that one is both knowledge and feeling. Hazlitt is one of the few writers really who said, and I was thinking of Foucault, he actually said that knowledge is power. And knowledge is, he says knowledge is pleasure, but he also says that knowledge is power. So, in a way, he speaks about a particular knowledge as useful, but at the same time, he's very conscious of the role that knowledge can play, which is both at the level of body and the mind.
Yes.
So, I think that is very interesting and important.
Knowledge is very sensuous. In fact, people like Brecht would be saying this all the time through their work. And in the 19th century, this is to be defended because people made a distinction between what was scientific and what was human. And these people would say, oh, scientific, fine, but we are basically human. And human means that emotions, sentiments, they are also required in order to understand the truth of life.
Right. So he, Hazlitt in the essay returns to the question of language and then contests with this utilitarian idea of finding usefulness in words. He says, what is this, obsession about finding usefulness in words, and he says, for instance, I quote, he says, it has been attempted of late to set up a distinction between the education of words and the education of things, and to give the preference in all cases to the latter. So, again, you can see this is the time when, a lot of writers have had to defend poetry. Remember Shelley's defense of poetry. So, the idea is that, that what is the use of poetry, right? And, they talk about often the parody of taking Falstaff's sentence that, will it set a leg right or not, etc. So, poetry is not useful. So, Hazlitt is also in a way in these essays taking up the same issue. He's saying that people tend to make a distinction between education of words and education of things as if they are two different things. And they give precedence, they give a sense of preference to education of things, and words as unimportant. So he says that, and I quote, language, if it throws a veil over our ideas, adds a softness and refinement to them, like that which the atmosphere gives to naked objects. There can be no true elegance without taste in style. So, in a way, I think that what he does is, again, when, he's talking about elegance also. So, again, some ideas of the 18th century are also taken up and put in place, but he's obviously defending the idea of language being seen as, or working with language as useless, because, you work on things, you work on machines, you get the things. So, utilitarian sort of framework, yes. Right? So, language, words, emotions being sidelined. So, I think he's reworking that in the form of, ideas that need to be brought to the fore. And I think in popular imagination, people have already done away with the ideas or the usefulness of words and language. So, I think he's bringing that back in his discussion. And he says, let me quote also here, he says that we mean absolutely to deny the application of the principle of utility to the present question. By obvious transposition of ideas, some persons have confounded a knowledge of useful things with useful knowledge. Right? Knowledge is only useful in itself as it exercises or gives pleasure to the mind. Unquote. So, the idea that for him, knowledge is very closely associated to pleasure. And he says the other only knowledge that is useful is the professional knowledge. But beyond that, you cannot really be talking about knowledge of useful and putting them together, knowledge of useful things and confusing them with useful knowledge, right? So, he's constantly contesting the popular ideas by analyzing, them basis his, by reasoning out and offering a kind of rationale, in the essay. And this rationale is basically something which is more oriented towards pleasure and of feeling, and one that tries to defend the case of words and language as against things and objects and the usefulness of things and objects in life. So I think that's something that he is constantly doing in these essays.
No, talking about things, the utilitarians would always say that they are interested in things.
Right.
And this person says, yes, things are fine.
Right.
But then those things are meant for human beings.
Right.
And secondly, they are made by human beings. So the hand which made things, that cannot be forgotten.
Right.
And you are talking about the body. So the body is just reflected in the making of things.
Right.
And things, mean something sensuous to us. They add pleasure to it.
Right.
So it's a very fine, idea of explaining romanticism in terms that are 19th century
Right.
terms.
You see, also he doesn't explain it in some kind of abstract idealism. He is bringing it to the body, at the level of the body. He says it is sensuous. He says it is pleasure. He says it is associated with both pain and pleasure, even knowledge and the usefulness of things. And in this essay, he says that we cannot be required to know in detail. For instance, he gives the example of a shoemaker. He says for the shoemaker, for him, this professional knowledge may be important, the entire process, but for me who's sitting at the round table, that may not be important for me to know. I might know that it is useful, and yet I might not go deeply into it. So he's trying to bring it down to the actual examples from life and bring it down to the material reality. So it's not to say that he's talking about some imaginative idealistic world. In fact, he's using pleasure as the principle, combining it with rationality and the sense of reasoning, I think.
He's bringing pleasure to the round table which belongs to the common people.
Right, talking about the pleasures of life. So for instance, when he talks about another essay of his, which is number 28, it is titled On Imitation. Now, On Imitation is obviously about art, right? And here he discusses the pleasures of art, right? And he notes, and let me quote from there just to connect it with the idea of pleasure and pain, right? And he says, I quote, imitation renders an object displeasing in itself a source of pleasure.
Imagine that, yes.
He says in imitation, the object which is in itself displeasing becomes a source of pleasure, not by repetition of the same idea. But
it's a human being, who is imitating.
Right. So he says it is pleasure.
Yes.
He says that any artwork, any person who creates a thing, any person who makes a particular thing, that thing, that the making is the process, in the process brings pleasure to that person.
Yes.
That person. And he says that in life we don't see beauty. All of us, we are vulgar people. We don't see beauty. But he says the artist can see the art in life, but we can't see the art in life. We see the art in life when the artist puts it on the canvas, because the artist has already seen his art in life, but that art is not available to us. We only see art in life when the artist puts it on the canvas.
I think he is creating a background for the, those people who were aesthetes later on. They were all socialists.
Right.
And they were talking about the principle of beauty.
Right.
People like...
maybe arts for art's sake, as it comes up later.
And then, he is able to make things relevant for us from the point of view of what you call the romantic attitude.
Angle, yeah. So let me quote this. So imitation renders an object displeasing in itself a source of pleasure, not by repetition of the same idea. So it's not the repetition of the same idea, but by suggesting new ideas, by detecting new properties and endless shades of difference, unquote. So imitation or art really brings in new ideas and detects new properties which may not be there in the source or in the object. So when an object is painted by the painter, then the painter adds a dimension or a new property to that painting, to that object, which the object in itself may not show to the world. So I think it was very interesting about it. Then another thing he says, which I find even more interesting, he says, and I quote, art is the microscope of the mind, which sharpens the wit as the other does the sight.
So the wit is there in the mind and sight is there in the body or in the circumstance. So the two are brought closer to each other, and a new kind of entity is formed by the author.
Right. So art is the microscope of the mind, which sharpens the wit as the other does the sight, and converts every object into a little universe in itself.
Imagine that.
So it's like you've just zoomed in on a particular thing, and art, basically what he's saying is that the art works like like the microscope of the mind. That it is in detail, it is able to select a particular thing from life, and in that selection able to add an entire universe around that life, you know. And I thought that that was very beautiful articulation of what art is. Also remember that he's a visual artist, he's a painter. So he's not just dealing with words, but he's somebody who's very perceptive to colors, to the shades of things, you know, how feeling can be added to a canvas. So as much as he's talking about words, he's talking about the painting as well, because he is a painter himself. And he says one more thing, he says, I quote, "To the genuine artist, truth, nature, beauty are almost different names for the same thing." Unquote. What do you think of this?
This is quoting straight away Keats.
Right.
In a way.
Most romantics actually feel that truth, nature, beauty are almost different names for. Even in Kant, you see this idea, you know, of truth and beauty, you know, becoming one. And it is truth that gives this sense of sublimity, in fact, to beauty. And then, and again, he says, to the genuine artist, truth, nature, and beauty are almost different names for the same thing. So you can see the engagement is not frivolous. The subject involvement, you know, these essays, even though they are short essays, etc., he picks up a point and he has enough matter, insights on the matter. So it's not to say that these are frivolous stuff, or he's just taking a dig, or he's humorous. I mean, I don't see humor in this. I think it's all in his earnestness and seriousness that he's projecting this. And then one more quote from the same essay. He says, "Imitation interests by exciting a more intense perception of truth and calling out the powers of observation and comparison." So this is what imitation is. Imitation excites by exciting a more intense perception of truth. Again, only a romantic could talk about intensity and truth and the intense perception of truth, and then bring, you know, talk about the powers of observation, the power of being able to observe and absorb and then compare. Right? Let me give you, he gives a very interesting thing. He says, I quote, "The gardener delights in the streaks of a tulip or pansy freaked with jet. A mineralogist in the varieties of certain strata because he understands them." So you see how understanding has also come with pleasure. The gardener delights, so delighting and knowledge, they've come again. Right? So the gardener delights in the streaks of a tulip. And the mineralogist in the varieties of certain strata because he understands them. And then he says, knowledge is pleasure as well as power. Now this I found Foucauldian. I thought Foucault probably, you know, these ideas obviously were there, but Foucault could have just taken this idea from Hazlitt, that knowledge is pleasure as well as power. Knowledge comes from a source of knowing, that and pleasure and understanding go hand in hand. So he says that intellectual activity gives you pleasure, right? And that any pleasure is never devoid of understanding, or never devoid of understanding,
I think he's very profound in his observations.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, very insightful. That when he says a gardener delights, you know, in the strands of the tulip, it is because he understands them. Not everybody can appreciate the strands of the tulip, but a gardener who's closely worked on them knows what it takes to reach this point and for this tulip to probably get this strand. So he says this gardener understands and therefore is delighting in it, you know. But so knowledge is pleasure and also power. Now that he's moved to the next point, that it gives you a sense of understanding, it gives you pleasure, knowledge gives you pleasure, and that it is also a source of power. And true and power, because, you know, in the essay he goes on to say that this power helps you shape your current situation. He was a person who was an idealist, he was a philosopher, but he completely believed in the power of imagination and will of the individual to shape one's own situations by analyzing one's experiences.
Well, there is one thing that struck me as you were talking about it, that, you know, he is in a way living in the 19th century, but he is anyway foregrounding the 20th century than most romantics do.
Yeah, that's what, he's a very thinking sort of a constantly thinking about these things, you know, because stimulus, curiosity, knowledge, all of contemplative, he calls it, you know, contemplative pleasure.
Well, so friends, I think the points that Professor Bajaj is making are unending, and she would
Yes.
require another lecture to explain this. But we come to the end of the discussion, and I say that it has been a delightful experience in the sense, that the romantic idea is taken to its grassroots, which are actually objective in the 19th century sense. So, this kind of an idea, I think it's relevant more for today in the 21st century than it might have been for the 19th century. So, it's a good lecture, very educative for most of us, I am sure, and I thank you profusely for giving this kind of explanation, Dr. Bajaj.
Thank you very
That's
much. I
also
can
nice.
probably just read the last quote and then we can end this lecture.
Please
Yeah?
take half a minute because
Yeah.
already we are
Yes.
short on time.
Yes, sure. So, the last quote from this essay on imitation, I quote, "The poet and painter of imagination are superior to the mere philosopher or man of science because they exercise the powers of reason and intellect combined with nature and passion. They treat of the highest categories of the human soul, pleasure and pain." Unquote.
That I think is a very apt summing up of the lecture, and you already done it successfully. So nice, and thanks to you
Yes,
again.
I think the readers can now, the viewers can now analyze this and find the romantic and in essayist there.
True. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.